My name is Ivonka Joanna Survilla. I was born 3 years before World War II and left Belarus before the second arrival of the Russians. After my family's first encounter with the Red Army in 1939, my father had been jailed and was condemned in 1940 to spend 5 years in Siberian's gulags. My parents knew what awaited them in Belarus and decided to leave Belarus before the Red Army's second arrival. After an exodus which lasted 10 months, our family arrived in Denmark, where we spent 3 years in refugee camps before emigrating to France. In Denmark, as well as in France, our family participated in Belarusian community life. In France, I obtained a licence ès lettres at the Sorbonne and married a Belarusian with whom I emigrated to Spain, where I spent 10 years, 6 of which as a journalist preparing Belarusian broadcasts to Belarus. In 1969, my family moved to Canada. Belarus has been for many years the best kept secret in Europe. Until the Chernobyl catastrophe, the dictatorship of Lukashenko, and the protests in 2020 on the streets of Belarusian cities of hundreds of thousands of Belarusians against the rigged presidential elections of August 9, 2020, most people did not know about Belarus. It was the result of 2 centuries of Kremlin's endeavors to erase it from the maps of the world, for the same reasons it presently tries to erase Ukraine of the maps of the world. With Putin's help, dictator Lukashenko continues to oppress the people of Belarus while denationalizing the Republic of Belarus. To demonstrate to Putin his loyalty, dictator Lukashenko agreed, against the will of the people of Belarus, to join Russia in its war against Ukraine, thus adding to its other hardships the reputation of having become a co-aggressor of a friendly neighbor. In 1969, after the government of Canada introduced bilingualism, Canada badly needed translators from English into French, and the government published an ad in Le Monde, and since I had the necessary qualification, knowledge of both languages, experience in teaching French and journalism, I applied. It's possible that our family were the first Belarusians who arrived in Canada not as refugee seekers, but as badly needed and already hired employees. I began to work in the Federal Translation Bureau the day after we arrived, on the 11th December 1969. I worked at different levels in the Bureau up to 1996. After having worked in the bilingual sector of the Translation Bureau, I was asked in 1976 to create a multilingual French translation service, which I chaired till 1990. Multiculturalism has fascinated me since our very arrival to Canada. Our family joined the Belarusian community in Toronto and participated in their activities. In 1974, I was elected president of the Belarusian Institute of Arts and Sciences in Canada. In 1975, we organized a chapter of Belarusian Canadian Alliance in Ottawa and became active participants of Ottawa multicultural community. Our first success in Ottawa, organized with the help of the Department of Ukrainian Studies of the University of Ottawa, was the Belarusian Study Week, which included 12 papers by Canadian and US scholars on the topic of Belarusian presence in North America, an exhibition of Belarusian folk art at the University Unicenter, which the Museum of Man helped us to organize, and a poetry evening dedicated to poet Natalia Arseneva, at which she was present. At the end of 1975, I was invited to participate in the working group which had begun to organize, with the assistance of the Secretary of State, the first Ottawa Women's Multicultural Conference, which became a great success in Ottowan multicultural life. In 1980, I was elected member of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Ethnocultural Council, which represented 7 million Canadians. Our goal was to help implement Canada's multicultural policy. In 1979, Ottawa held its first Homelands Festival. 19 ethnic groups worked several months on its organization. Each group was asked to present 3 events: an exhibition, a kitchen, and a concert. Both the Toronto Belarusian community and New York Vashilok dance group helped us to make it a tremendous success. I coordinated the Belarusian participation. Thousands of Ottawans visited our pavilions and learned all we wanted them to know about our homelands, our culture, our cuisine, our folk arts, including dances and music. We participated in the yearly Homelands festivals until 1989, when I decided to dedicate all my energy to help the victims of Chernobyl in Belarus. In 1986, we received a devastating news about the catastrophe at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, located only 6 kilometers from the southern border of Belarus. It took us some time to get the exact information about the extent of the damage suffered by Belarus. In 1989, with 2 friends, we created the Canadian Relief Fund for Chernobyl Victims in Belarus, which I chaired up to 1997, when I was elected president of the Rada of the Belarusian Democratic Republic in Exile. The CRF-CVB brought more than 5,000 Belarusian children for a respite in Canada, and Canadians helped the victims of Chernobyl in Belarus in many different ways. I still occupy the position of president of the Rada of the Belarusian Democratic Republic in Exile, to which I have been elected for 4 times. The Rada was the only voice of the people of Belarus in the world until the events of August 2020, when dictator Lukashenko rigged the presidential elections of August 9, 2020, and Belarusians came out in hundreds of thousands on the streets of the cities of Belarus to protest against the stolen elections. Since then, the interim cabinet led by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya does a great job to attract the world's attention to the plight of the people of Belarus. The Western world is more aware of the realities of the Republic of Belarus, and Svetlana does not have to demonstrate any longer that the world is aware that the occupied Belarus is not a co-aggressor of Ukraine. As a native of Belarus, who has spent 76 years of my life outside Belarus, I have always considered it my duty to help Belarus become a European democracy. The life of any member of the Belarusian diaspora has been much more challenging than the life of emigrants from free homelands, whose only worry has been for many years to ensure the material well-being of their countrymen. The multiplication of autocracies in the world has, however, changed the nature of diaspora's activities in many countries, which make it a little easier to explain what oppression means. Belarusians are still, however, one of the most oppressed peoples in the world, and will be as long as their country will be coveted by the expansionist Russian Empire. While fighting to preserve our Belarusianness, we must use any acceptable means to ensure that the world knows about Belarus and sympathizes with the people of Belarus. Our activity is essential. We must be seen and heard in order not to let anybody try to make us believe that we do not exist as a nation, the way Vladimir Putin tries to make us believe that Ukraine does not exist as such. Thousands of exiled Belarusians in the world have all been activists without whom Belarusian people as such may not have survived our eastern neighbors' constant endeavors to erase us from the maps of the world. I am only one of them. Belarusian diaspora has also succeeded in keeping Belarusian culture and sense of identity. We have an active community in Canada. We consider it our duty at this time to help the people of Belarus to become a free and prosperous nation among the free nations of the world. We have many reasons to believe that our fellow Canadians will help us to achieve this goal, as they have helped us to bring more than 5,000 Chernobyl children for respite in Canada. About the Rada. According to an Estonian member of their government in exile, as quoted by Edward Lucas in The Economist in 2001, the very existence of a government in exile is what makes it important. It means that the existing rulers do not represent the people of that country. Whether it is recognized or not by other nations, a government in exile is the only legitimate voice of the people who elected it in the first place. The Rada of the Belarusian Democratic Republic in exile has been in existence since 1918, when it proclaimed the independence of Belarus more than 100 years after Russian colonial rule. As a legitimate voice of the oppressed people of Belarus, we defend the interests of our people and their rights every time they are violated. We do it in many ways. In statements we publish, our encounters with politicians of friendly governments, the letters we write, the events we organized, whose main role is to attract the attention of the world to the plight of our nation. We thus try to keep it on the agendas of the free nations of the world. In our statements directed to the people of Belarus, we try to help them not to lose hope and thus to survive until they become a free nation. We are supported by our diasporas, whose members represent us in their countries of residence and with whom we cooperate in every possible way to remind the world in a peaceful way that we exist.